Hello everyone, welcome to Astrologer Climate Witness tonight. Tonight I'm going to be reading out of this book first by Liz Greene and her other author Howard Sasportas, and I'm going to be reading an article by Steve Bull. Now we have the astrology here, and Steve Bull's article is the science. I think you're going to find this pretty interesting. Oh, and by the way, Happy New Year, everyone. What are your resolutions for this year? Are your resolutions to study more about what's happening because you haven't really done it yet much? I mean, many of the people who have been studying all this for years, they still look and keep track. But if you have not been following the information, the scientific information, a lot of what you hear and a lot of what you see here, even on my station or whatever other places, my channel, it's going to sound like conspiracy, it's going to sound like hoopla. You have to really study the science, or at least have confidence in those around you who may have, and listen to what they're saying. It matters to have expertise, and as astrologers, we understand that, correct? So there's probably enough people here on the channel that see it now and then to understand where we're at in the health of the planet, the illness of our planet. But there's many who may come here and see the beginnings of some of these YouTube videos, and they poo-poo it, and they're like, oh yeah, what does this person know? Well, it's not coming from me. And I have to remember to remind everyone, I am not in any way stating that the planets are causing this. That's not what we're here about. Okay, the planets are not causing it. The planets are mirroring what we are doing, what human behavior is causing, and what is happening on the planet. Okay. So again, the planets are not causing climate change, not causing planetary overshoot. Many of these cycles have happened plenty of times on this planet. What it's discussing or mirroring is the spiral that happens within our universal consciousness, and on some levels it's been a spiral up, but on other levels, in other existent realms, it's been a spiral down. Okay, so even though the planets recur in their cycles over and over, what kind of progress have we made? Are we only valuing the technological, physical world progress? Because we're valuing the wrong thing. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now, and I probably should have gotten rid of the treadmill. It would have added to the ambiance of this video, but yeah, I wanted people to see the fire. It's kind of small over there. Well, I have this fire, a candle to light our way into the new year of 2025. And I have a little something that some music I might add at the very, very end, just a bit of it. And so, again, with the light, I've been studying tarot. I mean, I dabbled in it for years off and on, but I've been studying it a lot more lately. And when I learned astrology, I learned from someone who also taught us tarot, and we had our own little deck that was plain, and we got to color it, and to learn the significance of the colors, etc. Anyway, It was an Egyptian tarot. Okay. And it was through the Church of Light, and we used those books. Now that's a little, the Brotherhood of Light. It was an offshoot, I think, if I remember correctly, of the Rosicrucians, which Rosicrucians were, I have to get this right, but some of it's vague. That was used by the Nazis and people in Germany at the time. If I remember right, somebody said something about Hitler using that. I mean, you can take anything, whether it be religion, astrology, science, and you can twist it for your own needs, correct? So keep that in mind. Anyway, what I was getting at with the tarot, we learned certain cards were different than say the average tarot deck that people use. For instance, in most decks, the Hermit was Virgo, and the Gemini card, the number 17 is the Aquarian card. But I don't particularly, I like the way we learned it. The Hermit seems very Aquarian to me with his lantern. He's trying to learn knowledge, and he's lighting the way for humanity to follow. He's lighting the path through knowledge. That's not really Virgo. In the Egyptian tarot, we learned that the High Priestess was Virgo. Okay, and I can really see that. We were taught that she is the seed potential within, okay, among many other aspects of her that we learned. So the Aquarius card to me is the Hermit. I mean, Aquarians can be real loners, correct? They have their peers that they hang around with, but they're always in the outer orbit of that, right? In a sense, because they feel so different, because they're trying to gather the knowledge of the universe, basically. And then with that lantern, he is lighting our way. Of course, this is all metaphorical, people. Okay, so keep that in mind. The person that is studying, the person that is searching in the dark for knowledge, whether it be researchers and scientists or people looking for a spiritual path, that's what I'm getting at here. So we don't want to negate and devalue people who are curious and want to gather knowledge about our universe. We don't want to devalue that, okay? It's a very important aspect of humanity, of humans, the curiosity and the need to learn and understand and innovate. That's part of Aquarius. But, you know, in some ways, we innovated ourselves right into a big dark hole, big black hole. Okay, so this is really a great chapter of this book by Liz Greene and Howard. I don't know how far I'm going to read yet. The chapter is towards the end. It's called Alchemy as a Psychological Metaphor. Okay, so we want to remember as we're listening, for those of you who are not into astrology and coming here, this is all metaphor. We're not trying to take these things and make them literal. Okay, it's representing what's inside the human mind and in the human heart, etc. Okay, all right, here we go. The symbolism of alchemy is alien to us, and therefore the theme of this seminar may seem strange to those of you who are unfamiliar with a psychological approach to it. Not only does alchemy initially appear to have little to do with the study of astrology, even worse, the layman who has never dipped into contemporary writers on the subject generally believe that alchemy was concerned with turning actual lead into actual gold. Okay. Now, the person I learned from astrology, the class, and taught us that Egyptian tarot, this is what he said. And I had read this in some of the other books. It's not about actual material elements. Okay. Okay. Since modern science has paid to this apparently naive medieval fantasy, alchemy has wound up on the rubbish heap with the flat earth and other relics of our reputedly ignorant ancestors. I would like to briefly touch on some of the historical aspects of alchemy first, before I begin to explore its relevance to us as a psychological map, and its close connections with astrological symbolism. At the end of the day, you might still have some reservations about rushing into the kitchen to transmute lead into gold, but I think you will see that alchemical imagery is as important a tool for understanding astrology as myths and fairy tales, and as you well know. I feel these are extremely important methods of entering imaginatively into the meaning of astrological symbols. Okay. The study and practice of alchemy was not limited to Western civilization. There's a very old Chinese tradition in it, and it was also known to the Arabs throughout the first centuries of the Christian era. In the West, there were two great flowerings of alchemy, one occurring in the 1st century AD and primarily centered around Alexandria, the second occurring during the Renaissance and primarily centered in Italy and Germany. This latter flowering continued up through the 18th century, at which point alchemy and chemistry parted ways, just as astrology and astronomy did. The inner or psychological content of both alchemy and astrology became separated from the outer or physical study, and since the Enlightenment, chemistry and astronomy, which are branches of what we now call science, have disowned their earlier antecedents. Okay. Now, Jung was quite fascinated by the alchemical text of the Renaissance and the writings of the Gnostics of the 1st century AD, because he felt that anything which contained so much power and numinosity must have had some profound psychological truth encapsulated within it. He applied the same kind of perspective to the alchemy that he did to the symbolism of myths and fairy tales. In other words, the imagery of alchemy is a map of psychological development, and in a particular map of the dynamics of the unconscious unfolding, its process of what Jung called individuation. Alchemy, like mythology, seems to have arisen as a naive and spontaneous product of the unconscious. It is really a form of mythology, which makes use of pictures quite different from myth, but which emerges from the same sea of the collective unconscious which has given birth to the stories of the gods over the millennia. The point over which the modern mind seems to stumble in understanding alchemy is the strange fusion of physical and psychic, which does not differentiate between inanimate matter and inner states. Physical gold and psychic gold are the same in alchemical writings, and base matter is likewise both inside and outside the alchemist. We have, on a rational level, split the physical realm from the psychic since the Enlightenment, and have accepted this split as a statement of truth about the nature of reality. But there are many important questions about the validity of this Cartesian duality beginning to arise within the scientific community now, and the unconscious appears to ignore the split absolutely, despite our intellectual efforts. The realm of substance and the realm of psyche are, in the terms of unconscious, indissoluble. They are merely different manifestations of a central psychoid reality. It is this perspective which we need to remember if we are to penetrate beyond the oddities of alchemical writings. But for that matter, we need to keep this perspective in mind when we deal with astrology too, because what we call a planetary influence can express itself on a bodily level as an external event, or as an inner emotional and spiritual state, as an ideology, as another person with whom we engage in relationship, or as any combination of these diverse levels. So what they're saying is, when you have a transit of a planet, it's symbolizing, mirroring any one or all of those things happening within your environment, within your experience, okay? It can be a bodily influence. It can be an external event. It can be an emotional or spiritual state, an ideology, as another person that we are in a relationship with, or a combination of any of those. So it's not like one thing. I like that concept of a sphere. Astrology works through a sphere, okay? We're experiencing astrology, okay? We're experiencing our lives, okay? Astrology mirrors that experience. So it's mirroring many different things that are, and any one planet is associated with particular types of experience, okay? Now, so bearing in mind that the alchemical lead and alchemical gold are dimensions of ourselves, and that the alchemist and his opus are symbols of the process of individual unfoldment, we can begin to see that a very important map of our inner development is offered by alchemy. All alchemical writings strongly make the point that alchemy accomplishes what nature leaves imperfect. In other words, left to our own devices, nature or human nature muddles through somehow in a state of incoherent conflict and confusion. But the alchemist saw himself or herself, for there were women alchemists also, as the transformer of this natural chaos. Within the personality, we have a lot of conflicting emotions, a lot of conflicting thoughts, and what we're trying to do is sort them out, Virgo-ish, right? And make them harmonious within us, Libra. You get my point, right? Okay. From what they were saying. And as the transformer of this natural chaos, the individual who stepped in and interfered with God's noble but imperfect creation in order to accomplish its ultimate evolutionary design. You can see how very advanced a psychological perspective this is for the early Christian mind, because it is, in effect, a gross heresy. Implicit in this belief is the conviction that somehow God depends upon human consciousness for his redemption rather than the other way around, and that the individual effort in some way accomplishes what the divine is unable to do in the manifest world. This great heresy naturally made the church's ears prick up, because from early Christian times through the Reformation, the church and not the individual held the key to salvation. The alchemists were not unchristian, but they were a very special kind of Christian, and therefore subject to persecution. So they cloaked their doctrines in some very florid and strange symbolism in order to conceal the enormity of the heretical statement they were making. Alchemy presented a worldview in which the individual is no longer a poor sinner, helpless and damned without the succoring arms of Mother Church. He or she is a noble participant in God's creation, and in fact, can enhance or transform that creation through individual effort, self-honesty, integrity, and moral responsibility. Okay. And, I've said before, I'm not so much into the God thing, but in other words, we could say what nature has evolved us into. It's up to us to take the chaos within us and in nature, in our weather, in our climate, etc., and elevate everything to a higher expression. Okay? We take our anger, we take our delusional orientations, we take our mental thoughts that can be confusing and scattered, and we work with that. We work with our personality, we work with who we are, and we try to gather it together and transform parts of ourselves until we get the whole thing to mesh and flow and be real, okay? And not fall for cultural conditioning, not fall for escapism, away from it all because we can't handle it. Okay? Let me continue here. These are deep and difficult concepts, but I would like you to think about them carefully. You will see if you reflect for a while on this key issue of transforming nature through individual effort that this is also the same perspective held by modern psychotherapy, although more overtly religious in its language, the alchemist. Okay. The underlying theme of alchemy is not really about making gold. It concerns transforming the raw substance of human nature and releasing its potential for inner divinity, not through repression or transcendence, but through inner confrontation and integration. Alchemy was not preoccupied with getting rid of the baser aspects of the psyche. Instead, it was directed toward unification and wholeness. You can see why Jung devoted 3 volumes of the psychology of alchemy, because he equated the process of individual development with the great alchemical opus. Okay, just a little bit more. Now, another interesting feature of alchemy is that it is heavily astrologized. Astrology features constantly in all alchemical texts because it belongs to the same worldview. The outer and inner reflect each other and are part and parcel of the one whole. So we could say these days, nature reflects a lot of what's going on with us, and our greed and our extreme ego orientation and our extreme escapist tendencies, because we're always looking for that adrenaline, and we're always looking for the why can't I think of it? You know, the goody hormone there that keeps us happy. Anyway, that's reflected in astrology also. Okay, so it's the same idea. Okay. The famous emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, I've said that correctly before, but oh well. The alchemical and magical text written in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, which became the alchemical Bible of the Renaissance, states with beautiful simplicity that what is above is like what is below, and what is below is like what is above, and thus the miracle of the one is accomplished. The Hermetic worldview is familiar to all astrologers who have studied the antecedents of their art, because it is based on the law of signatures or correspondences. Okay? And I like to add in there associations, correspondences and associations. You can find this same perspective in many astrological texts of the 20th century, because the schools of Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner, Alice Bailey, etc., have retained the old Hermetic vision of reality. So the principle of Mars, for example, is not only a planet, it is also found in the earth as iron, in the human body as adrenal glands, and in the psyche as the aggressive instinct, and so on. Saturn is not only a planet, but also lead in the earth and the human skeletal system, and the impulse for self-protection. The sun can be found not only in the heavens, but also gold in the earth, as the human heart, and as the capacity to love. The vision of the unified cosmos with interconnections via a finite number of archetypal lines was fundamental both to alchemy and to astrology, and so the two were never separate. The metals upon which the alchemists worked were not only actual substances subjected to cooking processes, they were also seen to be the planets themselves and the great cosmic principles behind them. So if you were transmuting lead, you were transmuting Saturn, and in turn working on the defensive, dark, depressed, and barren aspects of nature and of yourself in order to release the solar gold of a loving heart and a joyful vision of life. So I'm going to leave that there. Okay. Now, I'm going to read this article. I think it's a little long. But I think that is excellent. My daughter bought me that book for Christmas. And I think I've had it because that picture I've recognized, but it might have been one that burned up in my house years ago. So I think I've had that book. Let's see now. Okay. This might get a little intense. Okay. But Happy New Year, everyone. This is from Substack. Today's contemplation, Collapse Cometh, 2025. U.S. peak shale oil and gas when the walls come tumbling down, by Steve Bull. This contemplation has been prompted by a publication, it says see summary below, focused upon the apparent peaking of shale oil and gas production within the United States. The commentary on U.S. shale extraction by the natural resources investment firm of Goring and Rosenweg began making this rounds within some of the Facebook group circles I frequent upon its publishing on December 19th. Here are a few thoughts I have had as I've read through the GNR analysis and taken some time to digest its implications and some of the accompanying commentary by others. It's quite possible that the peaking of extraction from U.S. shale deposits could usher in a speeding up of some trends, in parentheses, especially geopolitical and economic, as we travel ever forward towards global societal collapse, especially given the consequences this will have for the global hegemon that is the United States, since shale deposits decline very rapidly. And as much as some of the U.S. and as much as some of us like to believe that it is energy independent, and as much as some in the U.S. like to believe that it is energy independent, it is not. Not even close. Despite the shale miracle, the U.S. continues to import just under 10 million barrels of oil per day. It needs to import heavy and sour oil since most of its extraction is of the light type and its heavy oil production has been in decline since 1970. So the heavy oil, they call it, I believe that's the crude. In other words, that's what they use for making diesel. And that's extremely important. There is a graph here, but it's so small. I mean, on the phone, you couldn't see it. But if you look this up, I will give you the link, and you can look this up. You'll see it. And it's probably better to look at it on a computer. I say possible regarding the impact of this eventuality, since the following thoughts are not absolute. It is my perception and interpretation of evidence based upon my years of reading and writing about societal collapse and related topics, particularly the peaking of our master resource. Yes, people like us understand that oil is the master resource. We get that. But as with virtually everything else, observations, even of agreed upon facts, are interpreted through the eyes of the beholder and can result in different conclusions, even diametrically opposed ones. In addition, no one can predict the future with much, if any, certainty, so any assertions that I make must be kept in perspective. It can be these thoughts of mine are all sound and fury and signifying nothing, or it could be a fairly accurate Nostradamus-like prediction, only time will tell. The evidence that supports a story of an inevitable and impending societal collapse due very much to the also inevitable and impending end of oil age is very compelling. Okay, I thought about this earlier, and I read something early today or yesterday also. It's not that we don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen. We know the trend. The trend is towards the end of oil. But we don't specifically know our specific events, like how it's all going to work out along the way. Okay? And even years ago, when I first learned about peak oil in 2006, 7, 8, you know, the trend, okay, starting up here, the trend is down, right? But there's always the up and the down. and then the back up, and then back down, but then the back up, and then the back down. You see what I'm saying? And this is not even our most dire prediction. And this is not even our most dire predicament, since resource depletion is but one of the several symptom predicaments of our far more significant predicament of ecological overshoot. A predicament that has been expedited by very much by our leveraging of a one-time finite cache of photosynthetically derived and stored hydrocarbon energy. Putting all that net surplus energy into opposable thumbed hands of a storytelling ape with significant anxiety and highly complex brains was probably not the best evolutionary decision, especially since the species was already on the path toward overshoot once it began experimenting with large complex societies. Again, time will tell. I have emphasized previously that energy is everything. Without it, there's no life. Without the tremendous amount of net surplus energy, remember, net surplus energy is key, afforded humanity via hydrocarbons, the vast array of societal complexities, parentheses, i.e. political, economic, cultural, and technologies that our modern societies currently have, depend upon, and take for granted, would not likely exist. The human-contrived world would be a much simpler and smaller version of itself, and without much in the way of what we would define as modernity. It might resemble, if we were lucky, the 18th or early 19th century, just prior to the discovery of oil in the United States, and in parentheses, and followed closely in other areas around the globe. So, in the 18th and 19th centuries, remember, we were burning coal. Okay, oil was just much more efficient. Now, there certainly would not be 8 billion of us. Communities would depend upon their local resource base for the most part, and much or all of the energy-powered technologies we have would not exist. This is provided nature was keeping our population growth in check, and we hadn't denuded our environments of its plant and wildlife, as seems to be our way as we continue our seemingly ever-present expansion. We would likely still be an overshoot in such a world, but certainly not to the extent we are currently. Our speed towards a much smaller cliff, in other words, we wouldn't have gotten that high or complex is the word, of a society, of a civilization, if we hadn't had oil. So the cliff that we'd have to fall off from wasn't very high. We would still be somewhat self-sufficient, even though, the coal and whatever we were using would make life a little easier, right? Hydrocarbons have afforded us the ability to speed up the journey tremendously and produce a cliff that is much, much higher than it would be otherwise. And there's another graph. I don't know if I can make this visible here. Probably not. Okay, well, I'm not good at putting these things on here. I'm going to have to learn how to do that. But anyway, so it's beginning to look like peak oil might be raising its ugly head again for an increasing number of people. Not that it ever disappeared for some small number of us. Even when the shale revolution began to pump up the volume about it being vanquished, in other words, everybody was all about peak oil. Of course, the oil companies didn't want to admit it. And that before 2009-ish, okay. But once they, we're fracking, we're getting oil, we're cracking rocks, and we're squeezing out the oil, and we're doing natural gas and all that kind of stuff. That's what they meant by, in some here it's drowned out the noise holding on to the geologic inevitability of decline in production. The more dire consequences of peak oil, that's not where I was. Even when the shale oil revolution began to pump up the volume about it being vanquished, in other words, peak oil being vanquished is what they thought, okay? I knew better. I was reading a lot of people. Okay, the more dire consequences of peak oil had just been delayed, not avoided. You cannot forever ignore the increasing drawdown of a finite resource that becomes more and more difficult and expensive to retrieve. Diminishing returns can be most unforgiving. That's key, what I just read. That's what it's all about. That's peak oil. But I have to say, a lot of people have tried and are still trying to deny biogeophysical reality, mostly by way of magical thinking, and I expect this to get even more prevalent as reality bites us, wise apes, in the ass. So you got to understand something here, folks. Humans, even scientists, everybody, we've all lived all these decades and centuries in somewhat of a delusional state. Now, individually, some people at times face reality better, right? But as a species, we are very delusional. You know, there's always tomorrow. Tomorrow's always going to happen because if nothing bad has happened yet, then that means nothing bad's going to happen, right? There's that meme going around. I don't know if you've seen it. Hold on, I dropped my glasses. Okay. So, peak oil, in fact, arrived quite a number of years ago, depending on what type of oil you are discussing. Conventional versus unconventional. So conventional is the big old pumps, you know, that you see in the field, pump, look like old dinosaurs, right? And unconventional is the fracking, okay? Hydraulic fracking, natural gas and all that, the new way of doing gas, shale oil, have helped to kick the can down the road for humanity, along with the expansion of the Ponzi scheme that is our credit debt-based financial monetary systems. But the time is quickly approaching. Actually, it's past time, when it's going to have to face a major reconciliation with hard physical limits. Or is it? With the narrative management and distractions our ruling elite will employ, combined with the denial and bargaining that will take place amongst the masses, it may be that the notion gets buried in the stories of pending saviors and hidden by the proliferation and distractions to keep the hoi polloi and ignorance and compliant, because nobody really understands oil and how it's made and found. Yeah, renewables will save us. Look over there, a war. Nuclear fusion will save us. Look over there, aliens. A new leader will save us. Look over there. Look over there, enemy drones. Artificial intelligence will save us. Free markets will save us. Look over there. Taylor Swift is performing again. Technology will save us. Look over there. It's the first billion-dollar contract for a sports player. Space travel will save us. Look over there. Democracy is at risk from within. Something will save us because, heaven forbid, we should be open to and considering that maybe we need to be discussing not saving industrial civilization, but preparing for inevitable return to simpler living. Yeah, the reason, well, I don't know if he's going to say it. I read most of this. I didn't read the very end. I don't know if he's going to say it, but, you know, going back to simpler living. How simple? You know, I think right there what he's really getting at, we'll see. But he's probably talking about a planned powering down, a planned methods and organization of simpler living. But, yeah, that's really not going to happen. And if you don't do it that way, see, planned means what you're trying to do is save everybody. Okay, that's why, you know, it's really for some people, that's why they're doing renewables, because, you know, you got to have some energy in order to save people. You can't just shut everything down. Billions of people are going to die, right? So, all right, let me be quiet. I'll keep reading. The implications of this analysis by G&R could be immensely monumental for our complex societies. It is a stark reminder of the finiteness of hydrocarbon resources and the increasing difficulty of facing this reality. It is not the first, probably, and won't be the last of such reminders, but, like previous ones, will be mostly ignored, denied, or rationalized away. That's a big one right there, rationalized away, by those that don't wish to face what is quickly approaching or don't want the masses to be aware. That's the key right there. They don't want us to know. The peaking of the U.S. shale and gas is particularly problematic given that it has been the marginal producer of oil production increases over the past decade or more. So if it wasn't for the shale oil, we would be experiencing peak oil already. Forget it. Everything would be way different. We would be hurting bad. Okay. Virtually all demand growth has been met by this extraction demand growth. A decline in the overall production of oil, gas, hydrocarbons will derail not only utopian dreams of an energy transition, since all material extraction, refinement, and manufacturing processes are reliant on these resources, oil, including all non-renewable, renewable energy harvesting technologies and electrical-based products, including artificial intelligence, but also ramp up geopolitical maneuvering, including hot wars, over hydrocarbon resource reserves. They do have down here, when you get to it, 2 listings of available hydrocarbons. Remember, it's reserves under the ground. They're not talking about what's already produced or extracted. They're not talking about that. It's what's already under the ground. They know this, right? Okay. Much of the geopolitical... Oh, wait, I didn't read that. In fact, some of the consequences of this disaster in waiting have actually been with us and building for decades. Some peak oil analysts have argued that our ruling elite have been quite aware of the coming challenges and have planned accordingly, acting on their knowledge in a variety of ways. The bunkers, you know, they're ready. Much of the geopolitical gamesmanship of the past half century or more, for example, has likely been focused upon controlling hydrocarbon reserves. And as these finite reserves get as they get dearer, both in quantity and price, the geopolitical maneuvering has been increasing in intensity, particularly around and within these regions where the remaining reserves exist. The coming wars, or should I say expansion of current ones, may also come with increasing othering of those who reside close to our resources. Our, meaning the elite, the people who have the money and the power to get it. It doesn't matter where it is. It's their oil, right? It's like that rumor that Cheney said before the Iraq War, it's too bad our oil's under their feet. I've been reading more about that. I read about a lot of that before, and there's a lot of articles out there that are dismissing some of what I read, and I'm like, no, I looked up more stuff today. We'll cover that at some point. A reminder of which nation states hold the most oil and gas reserves and where regime change operations wars have occurred, are occurring, or will soon occur. And it's not over some completely bullshit justification like bringing democracy or freedom to a region. It's about expanding the racket that is war and about resources, especially hydrocarbon ones. Our rulers want to take it from their rulers, keeping the gravy train rolling for the entitled few and ensuring the hoi polloi receive some of the spoils so as not to rise up against their leaders are paramount regardless of the impacts upon the masses or ecosystems of our planet. So, I'll read that part again. Keeping the gravy train rolling for the entitled few and ensuring the hoi polloi receive some of the spoils so as not to rise up against their leaders are paramount regardless of the impacts upon the masses or ecosystems of the planet. So they're just trying to keep the gravy train rolling, you know? It's not like they really, really think way down the road, what's going to happen to my kids? Or what's going to happen to me when I'm super old? You know, it's like, I don't know. So, there's the listing charts, okay? They've got proven oil reserves of the top 15 nation states. So that's oil reserves under the ground, okay? And then this one is proven gas reserves, the top 11 nation states. All right. Accompanying this has also been a lot of denial and bargaining in the narratives being disseminated around the globe, such as the notion of finite limits being meaningless in light of human ingenuity and technological prowess. Okay, so yeah, they keep saying, oh, we're so smart, we can figure it out. It doesn't matter if it's running out. Wait, I wanted to go back. You know what I should do? I should tell you. The country with the most or the highest amount of oil reserves is Venezuela. 299,953,000,000 barrels. Okay? And then where's the United States? Well, I'm going to list the countries until I get to the United States. So Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Russia, Libya, Nigeria, United States. 35,230,000,000 under the ground. And remember, the world uses it's like 33 billion barrels a year now. So all of the United States barrels, 35,230,000,000, we could use that up in a year. Okay. All right. And then you've got Kazakhstan, Qatar, China, and Brazil. China doesn't have a lot of oil. Okay, I won't go into the gas, but you get my drift. United States is third from the bottom. Russia's at the top of the gas. Russia, Iran, Qatar, Turkmenistan, and United States. Oh, I was reading United Arab Emirates. Sorry. United States is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 6th on the list. Okay. Accompanying this has also been a lot of denial and bargaining in the narratives being disseminated about the globe, such as the notion of finite limits being meaningless in the light of human ingenuity and technological prowess, especially as it pertains to an energy transition. Depending upon who's telling the story, everything will be electrified and powered by carbon-free renewables and/or nuclear fusion fission, or if you really want to jump the shark, we'll simply mine passing asteroids or migrate to another planet. Do you believe in magic? The repercussions of peak oil, gas, and the loss of net surplus energy, keep those words, that phrase in mind, can only but alter our world in a myriad of ways, some of which can be imagined. Simplification and localization is approaching like a bat out of hell. That was in parentheses. But some that will be complete black swan events for most. Okay. The world is not going to be the same for a lot of people once we are well into the consequences of peak oil and gas. Not even close. Not period, even period, close. Period. Okay? The world is not going to be the same for a lot of people once we are well into the consequences of peak oil. And the stories that will be told by us storytelling apes will be something to behold as things unfold, especially by those dominant apes that hold sway over the masses due to their positions atop our power and wealth structures. Our elite wish to continue in those spots to maintain their privilege and prestige for as long as they possibly can by whatever means they have and can get away with. This is the key. Power never gives up power. It is quite possible that the facade of representative democracy will finally melt away as the elite consolidate their control over the wealth-generating extracting systems that provide their revenue streams and thus position of power and prestige. I expect to see the trend of increasing inequality continue and accelerate, as well as the expansion of narrative management to help justify, rationalize the above. In quotations, a quote, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." That was by Jonathan Van Gogh, 1809. Narrative control is their preferred method as it is less resource intensive and tends to be more effective, but they will not be afraid to use obvious and intentional violence and oppression, framing it in terms that will be more acceptable to those not targeted, at least for the moment. Ponder how some activist protesters have been vilified and oppressed in recent years. That was all in parentheses. If you think censorship and narrative management is bad now, just wait. Societies will crumble. Wars will rage. Billions may perish. It's not going to be pretty. Not, period, at, period, all, period. On the positive side, as some have argued, the decline in hydrocarbon reserves may help to slow and eventually will halt some of the detrimental consequences of its use due to our extraction and refinement industries and the industrial production of material goods that leads to the significant sink overload and ecosystem destruction. It used to be, especially when I was first learning about peak oil, they were hoping it would hurry up and happen so that we'd stop destroying the planet. Then they came up with fracking. Okay, a reminder that hydrocarbons, especially oil, is the master resource that supports the growth of maintenance of our societal complexities through its surplus net energy. The loss of this net energy surplus has huge ramifications for almost all aspects of modern human existence, let alone the creation, maintenance, and distribution of mostly unnecessary consumer goods and services. That's what I've been saying, unnecessary, frivolous. The production, procurement, and distribution of food, potable water, and regional shelter materials all depend significantly upon hydrocarbons. For so-called advanced economies, little of these important needs are produced locally or within the natural environmental carrying capacity of regions. Virtually all the people of these economies are significantly dependent upon hydrocarbons in one way or another, even though most have no idea whatsoever. They don't pay attention. It's just there. Hey, let me use it. I don't know. It's just they take it for granted. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks at the other and says, "What the hell's water?" Okay. Well, folks, we are being interrupted by someone having to put the wood in the fire. So here we go, the rest. That quote was from David Wallace Wells, 2005. Some questions that persist in my mind's eye as I contemplate the future. What happens when we no longer have the ability to control, contain, manage those dangerous complexities like the hundreds, thousands of nuclear power plants, chemical production, and storage facilities and biolabs? What happens when competing polities who hold thousands of nuclear weapons of mass destruction feel threatened? What happens when diesel fuels are unavailable or are exorbitantly priced that food production and distribution systems break down for most? What happens in cold climates during winter when heating by hydrocarbons is unavailable? And of course, if you're going to try to chop wood, it's going to be all done by hand, people. Yeah. As individuals, even relatively well-organized collectives, we have little, if any, agency in affecting what happens in the future with regard to these potential threats. Even the ruling elite have little were they actually to go against their baser instincts of protecting their personal familial interests. The wheels are in motion, and there's likely no stopping the slow-moving train wreck that seems to be our trajectory. So grab some popcorn and get ready for all sorts of things to go sideways in a variety of ways in the years ahead. Socioculturally, sociopolitically, socioeconomically, we are in for some interesting times for sure. As I stated at the close of my last contemplation, only time will tell how this all unfolds, but there's nothing wrong with preparing for the worst by collapsing now to avoid the rush and pursuing self-sufficiency. By this I mean removing all the dependencies on the matrix as is possible and making do locally. And if one can do this without negative impacts upon our fragile ecosystems, or to do so while creating more resilient ecosystems, all the better. Building community, maybe even just household resilience to as high a level as possible seems prudent given the uncertainties of an unpredictable future. There's no guarantee it will ensure recovery after a significant societal stress or shock, but it should increase the probability of it, and perhaps is all we can hope for, hope in parentheses, hope in quotes, from its pursuit. Okay, there's no guarantee it will ensure recovery after a significant societal stress or shock, but it should increase the probability of it, and that perhaps is all we can hope for from its pursuit. Okay, there's a note. Peak oil was the topic that first grabbed me by the short hairs and pulled me into the rabbit's hole of societal collapse and ecological overshoot almost 15 years ago. I did it even before that. I rented the movie Collapse, starring the late Michael Rupert, as my personal pick on a Friday afternoon movie hunt for our weekend family movie night. and in parentheses, for me to watch, not from the family, at our local Blockbuster back in 2010, and I haven't viewed the world the same since watching it. So when you look up this article, when you see at the bottom there in the note, the movie Collapse, you should watch that. I watched it a long time ago, and, well, a decent amount. Maybe it wasn't this particular one, but it might have been another one done by Michael Rupert. And I rewatched most of it today. So there's many other articles down here that just discuss peak oil, energy, etc. A really good place to go for information on energy is the website resilience.org. They have a whole, segment on energy. You can learn a lot of there. When Neptune and Saturn conjunct in Aries in the United States 4th house, it is going to have a lot to do with energy. Neptune rules oil. Saturn rules limits. There's people in our government who think they're going to just go right out there and find all this oil in our country. We sucked that milkshake dry in the 70s, people. Regular conventional oil. Of course, they want to go into our national parks. What are we going to do? Rip up the planet from one end to the other? What are we going to do? Rip up our own country from one end to the other? We're not going to come up with anything, folks. Like I said, there's 35 billion barrels left in the United States. Now that may be oil equivalent to. That's probably not just oil. It's natural gas and shale oil, etc. combined, okay? And made into barrels, excuse me. So I guess I'm getting a little tired. Thank you for listening today on New Year's Eve, and I hope you come to visit more often. I'm trying to transmute my skills here to a higher level so that it's more interesting and I'm not boring. I hope that the astrology that I read tonight is very meaningful for you. It is to me. I mean, I've come over the years to really understand how the planets are only symbols of what's here. As above, so below. The associations and the metaphors, correspondences, they're there. If you study astrology that way, you'll see. And like I said, there is a book, and I haven't been able to come up with it. I Googled it. Years ago, my original teacher had a book that described all the things that each planet and sign rule. And there was a long list for each one. And I remembered Neptune rules over oil. It's that liquid. It's just like it rules over alcohol, okay? And gases, of course. So, okay, I'm done. Happy New Year. I really hope that if you make some New Year's resolutions, you don't just get involved in this spiral of, I have to reach this mountaintop. You Capricorns, be careful. Don't set that bar so high that, you ultimately fail and get depressed. Sagittarians, you're just going to be so optimistic, right? That everything's going to work out perfect. But, keep in mind that the inflated balloons usually burst and fall. Okay. And, I don't know, I could go down a list, but I'm done. So you guys take care. Good night. Happy New Year.